The night was cold, and the wind carried the smell of rain. An old man stood outside a fancy hotel, looking up at the glowing windows. Inside, people were laughing. Music was playing. Expensive cars lined the street, and men in black suits opened doors for women in long dresses. He didn't belong here. He knew that. Everyone who looked at him knew that too. His name was Raymond, and he was 63 years old. His jacket was old and worn at the elbows. His boots had seen better days, maybe 10 years ago. His hands were rough from decades of hard work, and his back ached from bending over mops and brooms for more hours than he could count. For 40 years, Raymond had worked as a janitor at a local elementary school. He cleaned the floors. He fixed the broken chairs. He unclogged the toilets when the kids stuffed too much paper inside. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. It paid the bills. It kept food on the table. But tonight wasn't about work. Tonight was about something else entirely. 5 years ago, on this exact date, his wife had passed away. Her name was Dorothy, and she had been the love of his life for 37 years. She was a music teacher at the same school where he worked. That's how they met. She would play piano in the auditorium, and he would find excuses to sweep the hallway outside just to hear her. Dorothy always dreamed of attending fancy events like this one. She would cut out pictures from magazines and tape them to the refrigerator. Beautiful ballrooms, crystal chandeliers, women in elegant gowns. She never got to experience any of it. They never had the money. Life always got in the way. So tonight, Raymond decided to go inside. Not to eat, not to drink, just to see what it was like. Just to stand where Dorothy had always wanted to stand. He took a deep breath and walked through the front door. The lobby was even more beautiful than he had imagined. The floors were made of marble that reflected the light like water. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, sparkling with what looked like 1,000 tiny stars. People moved through the space like they owned it, because most of them probably did. Raymond felt small. He felt out of place. A few people glanced at him, then quickly looked away. He could almost hear what they were thinking. Who is this old man? What is he doing here? Doesn't he know this event costs $500 a ticket? But he had paid. He had saved for months, setting aside a little bit from each paycheck. This was his gift to Dorothy. His way of honoring her memory. He found a quiet corner near the back of the room and stood there, watching. Waiters walked by with trays of food he couldn't pronounce. Women laughed at jokes he couldn't hear. Men shook hands and talked about business deals and golf courses and vacation homes. Raymond just watched, and remembered, there was a piano in the corner of the room. A beautiful grand piano, black and shiny, with keys that looked like they had never been touched by rough hands. A young man in a tuxedo had been playing earlier, filling the room with soft background music. But about an hour ago, the young man had received a phone call. His face went pale. He apologized to the event organizer and rushed out the door. Something about a family emergency. Since then, the piano had been silent. Raymond couldn't stop looking at it. Something about it pulled at him. Something deep inside his chest that he had tried to bury for a very long time. He took a step toward it. Then another. Then another. A woman in a red dress noticed him moving toward the piano. She nudged her husband and whispered something. The husband looked over, raised an eyebrow, and smirked. A few other people nearby turned to watch, curious expressions on their faces. Raymond could feel their eyes on him. He could feel their judgment. He knew what they saw. An old janitor in a cheap jacket, shuffling toward an instrument that cost more than his car, his furniture, and everything in his bank account combined. He almost turned around. He almost walked away. The voice in his head told him to leave, to go home, to forget this silly idea. But then he thought about Dorothy. He remembered the way she used to look at him when he played. The way her eyes would fill with tears. The way she would sit perfectly still, barely breathing, like she was witnessing something sacred. Nobody had looked at him like that in 5 years. Nobody had heard him play in 5 years. After Dorothy died, he couldn't bring himself to touch a piano. The music reminded him too much of her. The silence was easier. The silence didn't hurt. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the anniversary. Maybe it was being in this beautiful room, the kind of room Dorothy had always dreamed about. Maybe it was the sight of that piano, sitting there alone and forgotten, just like him. Whatever it was, Raymond kept walking. He reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. His heart was beating fast. His hands were trembling slightly. He could hear whispers behind him. People wondering what this strange old man was about to do. A young woman with blonde hair leaned toward her friend and said, just loud enough for Raymond to hear, "Is he actually going to try to play? This should be interesting." Her friend giggled. Raymond sat down on the bench. The leather was soft and cool beneath him. He placed his rough, calloused hands on the keys, and for a moment, he just let them rest there. The ivory felt familiar. It felt like coming home after a very long journey. The whispers grew louder. More people were watching now. Some were amused. Some were confused. A few looked annoyed, like he was interrupting their important conversations. A man in an expensive gray suit shook his head and muttered to his wife, "Someone should tell him this isn't a talent show." His wife laughed politely and took a sip of champagne. Raymond didn't care. He wasn't playing for them. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was playing for Dorothy. For the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. For the woman who had loved him when he had nothing to offer but his heart and his music. He closed his eyes. He took a slow, deep breath. And then, after 5 years of silence, Raymond began to play. The first note rang out across the room, clear and pure and impossibly beautiful. It hung in the air like a question, like a prayer, like the beginning of something no one in that room expected. The whispers stopped, the laughter faded, and for the first time that night, everyone in that ballroom turned to look at the old janitor sitting at the piano. They had smiled when he sat down. They wouldn't be smiling for long. The first note changed everything. It floated through the air like something alive. It reached into corners of the room where conversations had been happening just seconds before. It stopped waiters in their tracks. It made champagne glasses pause halfway to lips. Raymond kept his eyes closed. His fingers moved to the second note, then the third. The melody was soft at first, gentle, like a whisper. But there was something underneath it, something powerful waiting to break through. The woman in the red dress, who had been whispering earlier, now stood completely still. Her mouth was slightly open. The smirk had disappeared from her face, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. Her husband, the one who had raised his eyebrow and looked so amused, now leaned forward in his chair. His drink sat forgotten on the table beside him. Nobody was laughing anymore, but Raymond wasn't thinking about them. He wasn't thinking about the fancy room or the expensive clothes or the people who had judged him the moment he walked through the door. He was somewhere else entirely. He was lost in the music, and the music was taking him back through time. He was 8 years old again, sitting in his grandmother's living room in a small town in Mississippi. The house was tiny and the paint was peeling and the floors creaked with every step, but in the corner of that little room sat an old upright piano. It was missing 3 keys, and the wood was scratched and faded. But to young Raymond, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. His grandmother had taught him his first song on that piano. She couldn't read music. She had never taken a lesson in her life, but she could play by ear, picking out melodies she heard at church on Sunday mornings. She would sit him on her lap and guide his small fingers to the right keys. "You got something special in those hands," she would tell him. "God put music in your soul, child. Don't you ever let it go." Raymond practiced every single day. Before school, after school, late at night when he should have been sleeping. The other kids in the neighborhood played baseball and climbed trees. Raymond played piano. It was all he ever wanted to do. By the time he was 12, people started to notice. The church organist got sick one Sunday, and Raymond filled in. The whole congregation sat in stunned silence as this skinny kid played hymns like he had been doing it for 50 years. Word spread through the town, then through the county, then beyond. A music teacher from the city drove 3 hours just to hear him play. She sat in his grandmother's cramped living room, listening to him perform on that broken old piano. And when he finished, she had tears running down her cheeks. "This boy needs to be in a real music school," she said. "He's wasting away out here." His grandmother didn't have money for music school. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His father had left before Raymond was born, and nobody ever talked about him. But the music teacher made some calls. She wrote some letters. She fought for Raymond like he was her own son, and when he was 18 years old, Raymond received a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, Juilliard. The name sounded like a dream, the kind of dream that kids like him weren't supposed to have. He still remembered the day the letter arrived. His mother held it in her shaking hands, reading the words over and over like she couldn't believe they were real. His grandmother sat in her chair by the window, crying quietly, thanking God for answering her prayers. Raymond moved to New York City with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope. The city was loud and fast and overwhelming. But the music rooms at Juilliard were quiet. They were sacred, and for the first time in his life, Raymond was surrounded by people who understood him. His professors said he was gifted. His classmates said he was a genius. Music critics who came to student performances wrote about the young man from Mississippi with fire in his fingers. Everyone agreed that Raymond was destined for greatness. Carnegie Hall, world tours, recording contracts. The future was bright and beautiful and waiting for him. Then the phone call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. Raymond was in a practice room, preparing for his debut performance at Carnegie Hall. It was only 3 months away. The biggest night of his life, the night that would change everything. His mother's voice on the other end of the line was barely a whisper. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She had suffered a stroke, a bad one. The doctors said she might not walk again. She might not talk again. She needed constant care, and there was no one else to provide it. His grandmother was too old. There were no other family members, just Raymond. He didn't hesitate. Not for a single second. He packed his bags that night. He left New York the next morning. He went home to take care of his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything so he could have a chance at his dreams. The scholarship was gone. The Carnegie Hall debut was canceled. The phone calls from agents and managers stopped coming. Within a year, the music world had forgotten about the young prodigy from Mississippi. There were always new talents, new names, new stories. Raymond became a memory. Then, not even that, he never complained. He never felt sorry for himself. His mother needed him, and that was all that mattered. She lived for another 12 years. 12 years of doctor appointments and physical therapy and small victories and hard days. Raymond was there for every single one of them. He got a job as a janitor at the local elementary school to pay the bills. It wasn't music, but it was steady work. It was honest. His mother passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, with Raymond holding her hand. Her last words to him were, "I'm sorry." He knew what she meant. She was sorry that he gave up his dreams for her. She was sorry that he never got to play at Carnegie Hall. She was sorry that his gift was wasted, but Raymond didn't see it that way. Taking care of her wasn't a sacrifice. It was love. And love was never wasted. After she was gone, he thought about going back to music. He was only 30 years old. There was still time. But something had changed inside him. The fire that once burned so bright had dimmed. He couldn't explain it. The piano felt different now. It felt heavy. It felt like a reminder of everything he had lost. So he stopped playing. He put that part of his life in a box and sealed it shut. Then he met Dorothy. She was the new music teacher at the school where he worked. She had kind eyes and a warm smile and a laugh that made him feel like the sun was shining even on cloudy days. She played piano in the auditorium during her lunch breaks, and Raymond would find excuses to be nearby, just to listen. One evening, he thought everyone had gone home. He sat down at the auditorium piano. Alone for the first time in years, he played a piece he used to perform at Juilliard, his fingers remembering every note even though his mind had tried so hard to forget. When he finished, he heard a sound behind him. He turned around, and there was Dorothy, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," she said. And in that moment, Raymond fell in love. They were married 6 months later. For the next 37 years, Dorothy was the only person who ever heard him play. He would play for her on their anniversary, on her birthday, on quiet Sunday afternoons when the world felt peaceful and kind. She never told anyone about his talent. She kept his secrets safe. She understood that the music belonged to them alone. Now Dorothy was gone, and Raymond was sitting at a piano in a fancy hotel ballroom, surrounded by strangers who had no idea who he was or what he had been through. But he wasn't playing for them. He was playing for her. The melody poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. It started soft and slow, each note hanging in the air for just a moment before the next one followed. Raymond's rough hands moved across the keys, with a gentleness that seemed impossible. These were hands that had scrubbed floors and fixed broken pipes and carried heavy bags of trash for 40 years. But right now, in this moment, they were doing what they were always meant to do. The piece he played was called Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It was written by a composer named Chopin, almost 200 years ago. It was one of the most difficult piano pieces ever created. Professional pianists practiced for years just to play it properly. Some never mastered it at all. Raymond had learned it when he was 19 years old, in a tiny practice room at Juilliard. His professor had told him it was too advanced, that he should wait another year or two. But Raymond had stayed up night after night, his fingers bleeding from the effort, until he could play every note from memory. That was over 40 years ago. He hadn't touched this piece since. But somehow, his hands remembered. His heart remembered. And as the music filled the ballroom, something magical began to happen. The first person to stop talking was a businessman near the bar. He had been in the middle of a conversation about stock prices and quarterly earnings. Important things. Serious things, but when the music reached his ears, the words died in his throat. He turned toward the piano, his glass of whiskey frozen halfway to his lips. His business partner kept talking for a few more seconds, then noticed he had lost his audience. He turned to see what had captured his friend's attention. And then he fell silent too. One by one, conversations around the room began to fade. It was like watching candles being blown out, each voice disappearing until only the music remained. A woman in a blue dress had been showing photos on her phone to a small group of friends. Vacation pictures from some tropical island. Beautiful beaches and clear water, and expensive resorts. But now her phone sat forgotten in her hand as she stared at the old man at the piano. A young waiter who had been clearing dishes from a nearby table stopped moving entirely. He was 22 years old, and working this job to pay his way through college. He had never really understood classical music before. It always seemed boring and old-fashioned, something for his grandparents' generation. But this was different. This was something he could feel in his chest. The event organizer, a woman in her 50s who had planned hundreds of galas and charity dinners, stood near the entrance with her clipboard pressed against her heart. She had hired countless musicians over the years, professionals with fancy degrees and impressive resumes. None of them had ever made her feel like this. Raymond played on, unaware of the transformation happening around him. His eyes were still closed. In his mind, he wasn't in this ballroom anymore. He was back in that tiny practice room at Juilliard, 19 years old, and full of dreams. He could smell the old wood of the piano and hear the radiator clanking in the corner. He could feel the ache in his fingers and the fire in his soul. The music grew stronger. The notes came faster. Raymond's body swayed slightly as his hands danced across the keys. There was a conversation happening between him and the piano, a language that didn't need words. Anyone watching could see it. This wasn't just a performance. This was something deeper, something sacred. The blonde woman who had giggled earlier now sat perfectly still in her chair. Her friend, the one she had whispered to, was gripping her arm without realizing it. Neither of them could look away. The man in the gray suit who had muttered about talent shows was leaning forward now, his elbows on his knees, his expensive watch catching the light as he stared at the piano. His wife had put down her champagne. Her perfectly manicured hand was pressed against her mouth. Near the back of the room, an elderly gentleman sat alone at a table. He was 81 years old, a retired surgeon who had seen more of life than most people could imagine. He had delivered babies and held hands with dying patients and watched miracles and tragedies unfold in operating rooms around the world. He thought he had felt every emotion there was to feel. But as he listened to Raymond play, tears began to roll down his weathered cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't try to hide them. He just let them fall. The music told a story without using a single word. It spoke of dreams that were born in small houses with peeling paint. It spoke of grandmothers who believed in miracles, and mothers who worked their fingers to the bone. It spoke of choices that cost everything, and love that made the cost worth paying. Raymond's fingers found a passage that seemed to cry out with longing. The notes climbed higher and higher, reaching for something just out of grasp. Then they tumbled back down, gentle and sad, like autumn leaves falling from a tree. A young woman standing near the dessert table began to cry. She was 28 years old and worked 60 hours a week at a job she hated. She had dreams once, when she was younger, dreams of being an artist, of creating beautiful things, of living a life that mattered. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had gotten buried under bills and responsibilities, and the fear of failure. Listening to this old man play, she remembered what it felt like to want something so badly it hurt. The music shifted again. It grew darker, heavier. There was pain in these notes. Deep, old pain that had been carried for decades. Raymond was playing the part of the piece that always reminded him of saying goodbye. Goodbye to New York. Goodbye to Carnegie Hall. Goodbye to the future he was supposed to have. But then something unexpected happened. The melody began to soften. The heaviness lifted, and in its place came something that sounded almost like hope. Like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. Like the moment you realize that even though everything has changed, you are still here. You are still breathing. You are still alive. Raymond was thinking about Dorothy. He was thinking about the day she found him playing in that empty auditorium. He was thinking about the look in her eyes when she said those words that changed his life. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Nobody had ever said that to him before. Not his professors at Juilliard. Not the music critics who wrote about his talent. Just Dorothy. A simple music teacher with kind eyes and a warm heart. She saw him. The real him. Not the prodigy. Not the janitor. Just the man with music in his soul and love in his heart. The room was completely silent now except for the piano. 200 people stood frozen in place, caught in a spell they didn't understand but couldn't break. Some were crying openly. Others had their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them like a wave. The bartender had stopped polishing glasses. The kitchen staff had gathered near the doorway, peering into the ballroom. Even the security guard by the front entrance had stepped inside, drawn by something he couldn't explain. Raymond played the final notes of the passage, and the melody hung in the air, like a question waiting to be answered. But he wasn't finished yet. The hardest part of the piece was still coming. The part that had taken him months to learn. The part that separated the good pianists from the great ones. Raymond opened his eyes for just a moment. Through the blur of his memories, he saw the faces watching him. He saw the tears. He saw the wonder. He saw the same look that Dorothy used to have when she listened to him play. He closed his eyes again and let his fingers find the next note. The real magic was about to begin. Raymond's fingers flew across the keys like they had a life of their own. The music exploded into something fierce and wild and impossibly beautiful. Notes tumbled over each other, racing and chasing and weaving together in patterns that seemed to defy logic. His left hand thundered in the low register while his right hand sang out melodies that pierced straight through the heart. This was the part of the piece that separated the ordinary from the extraordinary. The part that required not just skill, but soul. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't pretend. Either you had lived enough life to understand this music, or you hadn't. Raymond had lived enough life. His hands remembered every note. But it was his heart that gave the music its power. 40 years of memories poured through his fingertips. 40 years of joy and sorrow and everything in between. He thought about his grandmother, sitting in her rocking chair by the window, humming church songs while the Mississippi sun set behind the trees. She had died when he was 25, just 2 years after he left Juilliard. He never got to play for her again after he came home. There was never time. There was never energy. He was too busy taking care of his mother, too busy working, too busy surviving. He had always planned to play for her one more time. He never got the chance. The music grew heavier, darker. Raymond leaned into the piano like he was trying to push through a wall. The notes spoke of regret, of all the things we mean to do, but never get around to doing, of the people we love but forget to tell, of the moments we think will last forever until suddenly they're gone. In the audience, a middle-aged man in a dark blue suit felt something break open inside his chest. He hadn't spoken to his father in 3 years. They'd had a stupid argument about something that didn't even matter anymore. Pride had kept them apart. Stubbornness had built walls between them. Now, listening to this music, he realized how foolish he had been. Life was too short. Life was too fragile. He pulled out his phone and typed a message with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry. I love you. Can we talk?" He hit send before he could change his mind. Raymond didn't see any of this. His eyes were closed, and he was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about his mother now. About the years he spent caring for her after her stroke. About the small apartment they shared, with its worn carpet and leaky faucet, and the smell of medicine that never quite went away. About the nights when she couldn't sleep and he would sit beside her bed, holding her hand, telling her stories about his time in New York. She always asked him to play. Even when she couldn't speak clearly, she would point toward the old keyboard he kept in the corner. But he never did. The music reminded him too much of what he had lost. So he made excuses. He said he was tired. He said maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. The night she died, he sat alone in that quiet apartment and stared at the keyboard for hours. He wanted to play something for her. A farewell. A thank you. An apology for all the times he said no, but his hands wouldn't move. The music had left him. Or maybe he had left the music. Either way, the silence stretched on until the sun came up, and he realized that some moments, once gone, can never be reclaimed. The piano sang out a passage of unbearable sadness. The notes fell like tears, each one heavier than the last. Several people in the ballroom had to look away. It was too much. Too raw. Too real. A woman in her 60s pressed a napkin to her eyes. She had lost her husband to cancer 4 years ago. They had been married for 42 years. Some days, she still reached for him in bed before remembering he wasn't there. Listening to this music, she felt like someone finally understood. Someone knew exactly what it meant to carry that kind of emptiness. But then something shifted. Raymond's hands found a new melody. Something tender and warm, hidden within the storm of notes. It rose up slowly, carefully, like a flower pushing through concrete. The darkness was still there. But now there was light too. Pain and beauty, woven together so tightly they became the same thing. He was thinking about Dorothy. He remembered the first time she made him laugh after his mother died. Really laugh. Deep in his belly, until tears rolled down his cheeks. He remembered thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could be happy again. He remembered their wedding day. A small ceremony in a little church, with only a handful of friends and family. Dorothy wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. When she walked down the aisle, Raymond forgot how to breathe. He remembered Sunday mornings in their kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper while jazz played softly on the radio. He remembered the way she would hum along without realizing it. He remembered the way she would catch him staring at her and ask, "What?" And he would say, "Nothing. Just looking at you." He remembered the night she got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the tests, and the doctors, and the words that changed everything. 6 months. Maybe less. There was nothing they could do. Raymond spent those final months trying to memorize everything about her. The sound of her voice. The smell of her hair. The way her hand felt in his, he knew that memories were all he would have left, so he tried to hold on to every single one. On her last night, she asked him to play for her. They had moved a small electric piano into her hospital room, against the rules, because some rules don't matter when time is running out. He played for 3 hours straight. Every song she had ever loved. Every melody that had ever made her smile. His fingers ached, and his eyes burned. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was all he could give her now. When he finished, she looked at him with those beautiful eyes. So tired, but still so full of love. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the music. For everything." She died just before sunrise. He was holding her hand when she slipped away. The ballroom had become completely silent. Not a whisper. Not a breath. 200 people stood frozen, caught in the grip of something they couldn't explain. Raymond was crying now. He didn't try to hide it. The tears fell onto the keys, mixing with the music, becoming part of it. His hands never stopped moving. Even through the grief, even through the memories, the music poured out of him like it had been waiting 40 years for this moment. The piece was reaching its end. The wild passages had calmed into something soft and peaceful. The storm had passed. What remained was acceptance, understanding, a quiet kind of hope that comes only after you have faced the worst and survived. Raymond played the final notes with everything he had left. Each one was a goodbye. To his grandmother, to his mother, to his dreams, to Dorothy, to the young man he used to be and the old man he had become. The last note hung in the air for what felt like forever. Then silence. Complete and total silence. Raymond sat at the piano, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. He didn't look up. He didn't move. He just sat there, emptied of everything, feeling lighter than he had felt in years. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then the room exploded. The applause hit him like a wave. It started somewhere in the back of the room, a single pair of hands clapping together. Then another pair joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom had erupted into thunderous applause that shook the chandeliers and rattled the champagne glasses on the tables. Raymond slowly lifted his head. Through blurry eyes, he saw something he never expected to see. Everyone was standing. Every single person in that room had risen to their feet. The businessmen in their expensive suits, the women in their elegant gowns, the waiters and the bartenders and the kitchen staff who had gathered near the doorway. All of them were on their feet, clapping so hard their palms must have been stinging. But it wasn't just the applause that struck him, it was the tears. The woman in the red dress, who had whispered and smirked when he first sat down, was now crying openly. Mascara running down her cheeks. She didn't seem to care. She just kept clapping, her hands pressed together like she was praying. The man in the gray suit who had muttered about talent shows was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. His wife stood beside him, clutching his arm, her whole body trembling with emotion. The elderly surgeon in the back of the room hadn't stopped crying since the music began. He raised his hands above his head, applauding with a strength that surprised even himself. 81 years old, and he had just heard the most beautiful thing of his entire life. Raymond didn't know what to do. He sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. He had expected people to ignore him, maybe laugh at him, maybe ask him to leave. He never expected this. A young woman pushed through the crowd and approached the piano. It was the blonde woman who had giggled earlier, the one who had whispered to her friend about how interesting this would be. Her face was wet with tears, and her hands were shaking. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for laughing." Raymond looked at her and saw something familiar in her eyes. Regret. Shame. The realization that she had judged someone without knowing their story. He reached out and took her hand gently. "It's okay," he said. "You couldn't have known." She broke down completely then, sobbing like a child. Raymond patted her hand softly, the way his grandmother used to pat his when he was scared or sad. The young woman eventually stepped back, still crying, and disappeared into the crowd. More people came forward. One by one, they approached the old janitor at the piano to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him what his music had meant to them. A businessman told him that he had just texted his father for the first time in 3 years. A woman said the music reminded her of her late husband, and for a few beautiful minutes, she felt close to him again. A teenage boy who worked as a busboy said he had been thinking about quitting his piano lessons, but now he knew he never would. Each story hit Raymond like a small miracle. He had no idea his music could do this. He had no idea that the pain he carried inside could somehow heal the pain in others. The event organizer made her way to the front of the room. She was a practical woman who had seen a lot in her career, but even she was wiping tears from her eyes. "Sir," she said, her voice unsteady, "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but that was the most incredible thing I have ever witnessed at any event I have ever planned. Please, tell us your name." Raymond stood up slowly. His legs were shaky, and his heart was pounding in his chest. He looked out at the crowd of faces watching him, waiting for him to speak. "My name is Raymond," he said quietly. "I'm a janitor at Jefferson Elementary School. I've been cleaning floors and fixing broken chairs for 40 years. A murmur went through the crowd. Confusion. Disbelief. "How could a janitor play piano like that?" Raymond continued. "A long time ago, I had a scholarship to Juilliard. I was supposed to play at Carnegie Hall. But life had other plans. My mother got sick, and I went home to take care of her. I never went back." The room was completely silent now. Everyone was hanging on his every word. "I didn't play piano for a long time after that. It hurt too much. But then I met my wife, Dorothy. She was a music teacher. She heard me play one night when I thought nobody was listening, and she said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "Dorothy passed away 5 years ago today. She always dreamed of coming to fancy events like this one. Beautiful rooms with chandeliers and music, and people dressed in their finest clothes. She never got the chance. So tonight, I came here for her. I came to see what she always wanted to see. And when I saw that piano sitting there, empty and waiting, I had to play. For her. For my mother. For my grandmother. For everyone I've ever loved and lost." He paused, looking down at his rough, calloused hands. "I didn't expect anyone to listen. I didn't expect anyone to care. I just wanted to play one more time. For Dorothy." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. Then someone in the back of the room began to clap again. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was applauding again, even louder than before. Some people were cheering. Some were crying. Some were doing both at the same time. The event organizer leaned in close to Raymond and said, "Sir, there's someone here who would like to meet you. He's been trying to get to the front of the room for the last 10 minutes. So, a man in his 50s made his way through the crowd. He was well dressed but not flashy, with kind eyes and graying hair. He extended his hand to Raymond. "My name is Thomas," he said. "I run a small record label. We specialize in classical and instrumental music. I've been in this business for 30 years, and I have never heard anything like what you just played. I mean it. Never." Raymond shook his hand, confused. "Thank you. That's very kind." "I'm not being kind," Thomas said. "I'm being honest. Sir, I don't know what your plans are, but I would be honored if you would consider recording an album with us. Your story, your music, it deserves to be heard by the world. Not just this room. The world." Raymond didn't know what to say. An album? At 63 years old? After 40 years of mopping floors and fixing toilets? He thought about Dorothy. About what she would say if she were standing beside him right now. He could almost hear her voice in his ear, warm and loving, and full of belief. It's never too late. It was never too late. Raymond looked at the man and smiled. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." 1 year later, Raymond released his first album. He called it For Dorothy. Every cent he earned went to music programs for underprivileged children. Kids who didn't have money for lessons, Kids who came from small towns with broken pianos and big dreams. Kids just like he used to be. The video of his performance that night went viral. 50 million views in the first month alone. People from all over the world watched an old janitor sit down at a piano and make an entire room cry. But Raymond didn't care about the numbers. He didn't care about the fame. What mattered to him was the letters. Thousands of letters from people who had seen the video and been moved to reconnect with estranged family members, to pick up an instrument they had abandoned years ago, to believe that it was never too late to follow their dreams. In every interview, people asked him the same question. Why did you wait so long to play again? And Raymond would smile, the same gentle smile his grandmother used to have, and give the same answer every time. I didn't wait, he would say. I was just saving it for the right moment. I played for my grandmother. I played for my mother. I played for my wife. That night, I finally played for everyone who has ever been told they're not good enough. Everyone who has ever given up something they loved, for someone they loved more. Number 1. He would pause, his eyes glistening with tears that never quite fell. I played for Dorothy. And somehow, she made sure the whole world was listening.